It started with something so familiar, something so ingrained in the very identity of Los Angeles, the Hollywood sign, the landmark that stood proudly, stretching across the hills as a symbol of achievement, fame, and the glimmer of dreams. You've seen it on postcards, movies, and countless photographs. For years, it represented the pinnacle of success in a world driven by stars, luxury, and fortune. But that day, that fateful moment, everything changed. It wasn't the picture-perfect Hollywood of dreams. It was a nightmare, a hellscape of flames that erupted around the sign, a tornado of fire swirling, churning in the air like some force beyond nature, tearing apart the very fabric of this iconic symbol. It felt like the apocalypse. I can't fully explain it, the heat, the intensity, but when I saw the Hollywood sign burning, I didn't just witness destruction. It was like watching Pandora's box being opened in real time. The flames weren't just fire, they felt alive, like they were tearing down everything Hollywood had ever stood for, what had once symbolized the dreams of the world, where everyone imagined a place of promise and possibility, was now crumbling to dust. The H fell first, collapsing into a storm of embers. Then the O followed, one by one, each letter consumed until nothing remained but the thick black smoke curling into the sky. I swear I felt something deep in my chest when the last letters of Hollywood were reduced to ash. It wasn't just a symbol, it was a warning. The fire was an undeniable statement that everything we believed in, everything Hollywood represented, was falling apart. And we, the people who idolized these very symbols of fame and success, had allowed this to happen. Let me ask you, what do you think the Hollywood sign represents? The answer, I believe, is far more profound than you could ever imagine. The flames, they didn't just destroy, they exposed the truth. It wasn't just Hollywood that was burning, it was all of us. We had placed our faith in things that couldn't save us. We had worshipped false idols, put our trust in fame, money, and systems that thrived on power and pride rather than compassion, love, or sacrifice. I stood there, on a hill, staring down at the devastation. The city below was unrecognizable. The streets, once glittering with life, were now choked with smoke, the familiar skyline a blur through the suffocating haze. In the streets, people were running in every direction. Their faces were pale, their eyes wide with terror, as if they were seeing their whole world collapse before them. Some of them, desperate to hold on to what little they could, clutched their designer handbags, their precious electronics, or their cars, things that were now irrelevant in the face of the devastation. But here's where it got unsettling. The fire wasn't just destroying the city. It wasn't random. It wasn't chaotic. It was methodical, purposeful. The flames didn't just consume, they stripped away everything, layer by layer. What we thought was solid, untouchable, was being consumed by the fire, leaving only the ashes of what we once called success. The smoke, thick and stifling, rolled over everything like a suffocating blanket. The sun barely peered through, casting a dim red hue on everything. There was no escaping it. I watched as the streets, usually filled with people striving for success, were now filled with the sounds of panic, the sound of desperation, the sound of humanity coming face to face with its own failure. And then I felt it. It wasn't a physical sensation, but I could feel his presence. I didn't need to turn around to know that Jesus was standing beside me. His presence was undeniable, calm, steady, unshaken amidst the raging chaos. He didn't speak, but his sorrow was palpable. I could feel it deep in my soul. The fire, I realized, wasn't just a fire. It was judgment, a revelation, and we were all part of it. As I watched the destruction unfold, I understood something I hadn't before. The fire wasn't just burning material things. It wasn't just destroying the structures of Hollywood or the city of Los Angeles. It was exposing the lies, the false gods, and the empty promises that had been built over the years. Hollywood, once seen as a place where dreams were made, had become a hollow shell, filled with empty pursuits, shallow desires, and lives disconnected from true purpose. And the fire was revealing that emptiness. It felt like the flame was stripping away the superficial glamour of wealth, fame, and success, the very things we had come to worship. It was as though the fire itself was an act of divine intervention, showing us that the things we had placed our trust in, the idols we had built up, were nothing but a facade. The ashes were not just from the Hollywood sign. They were from our dreams, our aspirations, our belief in the unattainable. Everything that had been glorified, idolized, and worshipped for decades was now turning to dust. And all that was left was the truth, raw and painful, a reminder that these idols could not save us. As the fire raged on, I felt the weight of what I was witnessing. The false idols of fame, wealth, and power had created a society that was disconnected, disillusioned, and desperate. In the midst of the fire, there was no escape from the truth. The smoke wasn't just choking the air, it was choking the very life out of the things we had held onto for so long. People had sacrificed their lives for success, for things that ultimately couldn't provide peace, security, or fulfillment. And that's when I saw it clearly. This fire wasn't just an end, it was a beginning. It was a wake-up call, a chance to repent, a chance to turn away from the idols that had consumed our lives and to choose something better, something real, something lasting. I turned to Jesus, his presence still calm amidst the chaos, and I understood the message he was trying to convey. This wasn't just about the fire, it was about what the fire represented. The idols that we had placed our faith in, the systems that profited off of our desires and ambitions, were being destroyed. The flames were exposing the truth, and that truth was undeniable. The fire, though it raged and consumed everything in its path, wasn't merely about the destruction of the physical. It was a warning, a divine reveal of something much more insidious. As I stood there, watching the inferno of the Hollywood sign, I felt the weight of the truth pressing down on me. The grand facade, the lights, the allure, all of it was now crumbling into a pile of ash. But what struck me the most was not the chaos, the panic, or the flames themselves. It was the realization of what Hollywood had come to represent. Hollywood was once a beacon of dreams. It had been a symbol of opportunity, fame, and the promise of something better, a place where talent and ambition could combine to create magic. But as the flames tore through the city, I began to see a truth that had been hidden in plain sight for decades. Hollywood was never really about dreams. It was about power. It was about control. It was a machine that churned out illusions to feed the hungry masses, who, in their desperation for meaning, reached for the empty promises that glittered on the silver screen. I watched as the fire consumed the towering billboards, each one a symbol of the very thing that had kept millions entranced for years. The stars, once shining bright in their gilded frames, were now fading away, their smiles fading into nothingness. The camera flashes that once worshipped them now seemed absurd, their brilliance replaced by the smoke and haze that filled the air. The golden idols, the movie stars, were no longer gods. They were mere mortals trapped in a cycle of artificial praise, held captive by the very people who adored them. The scenes that unfolded before me, though horrifying, were also eye-opening. As I stood on that hill overlooking the burning city, I could see the layers of deception peeling away. The city that had been built on the ideals of fame and fortune was now being stripped to its core. It was as if the fire was purging the city of all that had been built upon lies. The glamour was being burned away to reveal a deeper emptiness. What was once considered success now appeared as hollow and fragile as the charred remains of the Hollywood sign. And there it was, in the midst of the chaos, the realization that the very things we had come to worship were the things that had brought us to this point. The movie stars, the luxury cars, the oversized homes, these were the symbols we had placed our hope in, but they were as flimsy as the billboards that had once depicted them. Hollywood had built a world of empty idols, icons made of plastic that crumbled when the fire touched them. As I gazed down at the destruction, the realization hit me like a ton of bricks. The fire wasn't just a judgment on the city, it was a judgment on everything it represented. The movie industry, once known for its stories of hope and triumph, was now part of a grand illusion. It had lured people in, telling them that fame and fortune were the ultimate goals, that success could be measured by the number of followers, the amount of wealth, the size of the house, and the brand of the car. But now, in the ashes of Hollywood, I could see clearly. The illusion was over. The pursuit of these idols, the empty promises of wealth, status, and recognition had blinded us to the true meaning of success, the true value of life. What had we sacrificed in our quest for fame? What had we lost in our obsession with achieving the impossible dream, family, relationships, integrity, and faith. These had all been cast aside in the pursuit of something that would ultimately turn to dust. And the people, the ones who had run from the fire, clutching their designer handbags, their jewelry, and their electronics, were only now beginning to realize the cost of their misplaced faith. These were the same people who had worshipped the idols of wealth and fame, who had let themselves be consumed by the idea that more was always better, that having it all would somehow fill the emptiness inside. But now, in the face of the fire, they were left with nothing. The truth became undeniable. We had placed our faith in things that didn't last, things that could be destroyed in an instant by the very fire that was now consuming the city. The people who had once run to Hollywood for fame, for success, for recognition, were now fleeing for their lives, grasping onto the things that once seemed important, only to find that they were worthless in the face of disaster. The fire, in a way, had stripped away the lies we had told ourselves. It had exposed the shallow, fleeting nature of the things we had placed our trust in. And as the flames began to recede and the smoke cleared, there was a profound sense of loss. But there was also something else, a feeling that in the aftermath of this destruction, there was an opportunity for rebirth, for redemption. As the fire retreated, I felt a shift within me. I knew this wasn't just a random event. It wasn't just a fire. It was a divine intervention, a call to action, a warning for all of us who had been blinded by the pursuit of the wrong things. We had been worshiping idols, chasing after things that didn't last. But now, the fire was offering us a chance to turn back, a chance to let go of the things that had consumed us, a chance to repent, to rebuild, to focus on what truly mattered. And there, in the ashes of Hollywood, I saw the hope of renewal. It wasn't about Hollywood. It wasn't about fame or fortune. It was about the people. It was about each and every one of us realizing that the pursuit of worldly success was not the path to true fulfillment. We needed to stop chasing empty idols and start building a life based on love, humility, and faith. The ashes of Hollywood were still warm, and the smell of destruction hung in the air like a haunting reminder. Yet, amidst the ruins, a strange sense of clarity began to form. The city, once alive with the glitz and glamour of 1,000 dreams, now lay exposed. It was as though the fire had cleansed everything, leaving behind only the raw truth of what had been built. The illusion was gone, and in its place, reality stood like a stark reminder of the choices we had made. As I watched the remains of the city smolder in the distance, I couldn't help but wonder, what does this destruction mean for us all? What did it reveal about the life we've chosen to lead? What had we been worshiping, and why did it all crumble so quickly? The more I reflected, the more I realized that this wasn't just a physical fire. It was a fire of the soul, a purging of everything that had been built on shallow foundations. It exposed the emptiness of our desires, the futility of chasing after things that couldn't give us the peace and fulfillment we sought. People had long chased the idea of success, the glossy magazines, the red carpets, the celebrities, the designer clothes. But in the end, these things were nothing more than temporary distractions, masking a deeper need for meaning and purpose. Hollywood had once been the epicenter of this illusion. The movies, the stars, the stories of love, triumph, and fortune. These were the things we believed would give us happiness. But as the fire tore through the city, those same stories were revealed as hollow, the promises broken. In the aftermath, only the scorched earth remained, and the truth became undeniable. We had placed our faith in the wrong things. It was no longer just about the loss of material possessions. It was about the loss of something deeper. The fire wasn't just consuming buildings and cars. It was consuming the very foundation of our beliefs, revealing the emptiness of the idols we had placed on pedestals. And, as the smoke cleared, a profound question hung in the air. What would we do now? There was a brief moment of silence in the city, a pause in the chaos. It was as if the world was holding its breath, waiting for an answer. And then, it came. The realization that the fire had given us a chance to rebuild, but not just rebuild the physical structures that had burned down. No, this was a chance to rebuild our lives, to realign our priorities, and to let go of the false idols that had been leading us astray. Jesus stood beside me, his presence steady and unwavering, as though he had known this moment was coming all along. His sorrowful gaze reflected the weight of what had happened, but there was something else there too. Hope. Hope that we would learn from this moment, that we would rise from the ashes stronger and wiser than before. This was a pivotal moment, a crossroads where we could choose to continue down the path of empty worship, or we could turn away from the idols and start anew. I watched as a few people standing on the edges of the devastation began to kneel. They weren't the wealthy or the famous. They weren't the ones who had everything. They were ordinary people, their clothes worn and their faces streaked with ash. But there was something different about them. They weren't running. They weren't grasping at their possessions. They were praying. They were choosing a different way. It wasn't a grand gesture. It wasn't something that would make headlines, but it was real. In the midst of all the chaos, they had made a choice. They had chosen faith over fear, love over greed, and humility over pride. I felt Jesus' presence beside me, and his message was clear. This was the way forward. The fire had shown us the truth about ourselves, the things we had placed our trust in, the things we had worshipped, the things that had distracted us from what truly mattered. And now, in this moment of devastation, there was a chance for redemption, a chance to choose something better. As the fire continued to burn in the distance, I understood that the transformation wasn't just about the city or the people in it. It was about the world, about humanity as a whole. The fire had exposed our collective sin, the ways we had placed our hopes in false gods, the ways we had built our lives on shallow foundations. And now, the question was whether we would learn from it, whether we would choose to walk a different path. The people kneeling in prayer weren't the only ones who had a choice. Each and every one of us had a decision to make. We could continue to chase after the illusion of success, wealth, and fame, or we could choose to follow a different path, a path built on love, sacrifice, and faith, a path where we sought truth and meaning, not in what we could accumulate, but in how we lived and how we treated others. But the path wasn't easy. It wasn't a path that led to instant gratification. It wasn't a path that promised comfort or luxury. It was a path of sacrifice, of letting go of the things that had once defined us. And yet, it was the only path that led to true fulfillment. It was the path that led to redemption, to healing, to restoration. The fire had burned away the illusions, but it had also made room for something new, something better. And as I stood there, watching the city burn and watching the people choose a different way, I realized that this was just the beginning. The fire wasn't the end. It was the start of something new, and it was up to each of us to choose which path we would take. The scene before me was both haunting and beautiful. The fire continued to rage in parts of the city, but in the places where the flames had subsided, a transformation was happening. The once barren streets, scorched by the destructive force of the flames, were now being touched by something new. The ashes were swept away by streams of water that flowed with a quiet persistence, cutting through the debris and cleansing the earth beneath them. I stood at the edge of this transformation, watching as the waters washed away the remnants of what had once been, a city built on pride, fame, and empty desires. Where the ashes had been, flowers began to bloom. Trees that had been blackened and twisted by the fire now stood tall, their leaves green and vibrant once again. It was as if the city itself was healing, returning to life in a way that was so simple, yet so profound. And in that moment, I realized something. The fire had not just destroyed, it had purified. The people who had chosen to kneel, to humble themselves before God, had become the key to this transformation. Their repentance, their willingness to let go of their idols, had set something in motion. As they prayed, as they turned away from the things that had once defined their lives, the fire itself had begun to retreat. The flames that had consumed everything in their path could not withstand the power of true repentance, of brokenness before the Creator. And where the fire had been, life began to flourish again. I watched as more people joined the small group that had started praying in the middle of the ruined city. They weren't doing anything extravagant. They weren't trying to save the city with their own hands. They were simply letting go of the need to control, to chase after fleeting pleasures, to worship false gods. And in doing so, they were opening the door for something greater to come in. Jesus, standing beside me, didn't say a word, but his presence spoke volumes. He wasn't angry. He wasn't vengeful. His eyes were filled with sorrow. Yes, but there was also love. Deep, unshakable love. the love that longs to see people restored, not destroyed. And in this moment, I knew that the fire wasn't a punishment. It was an invitation to turn away from the things that had led us astray and to choose a different path, a path of love, humility, and sacrifice. I looked at the people kneeling in prayer and realized that they had found something that many had spent their whole lives searching for. They had found peace, not the kind of peace that comes from wealth or success, but the kind of peace that comes from surrender, the kind of peace that comes from knowing that you don't have to carry the weight of the world on your shoulders, the kind of peace that only God can give. And in that moment, I understood why Jesus had shown me this vision. It wasn't just about Hollywood or Los Angeles or even the people in the city. It was about us all. We are all chasing something, whether it's fame, money, success, or even just the illusion of control. We're all trying to fill a void inside of us with things that can never truly satisfy. And in doing so, we've allowed those things to become idols, things we worship, things we put above everything else. But the fire had shown me something different. It had shown me that the things we worship are fragile. They are temporary. They are destined to fall. The Hollywood sign, the glamorous billboards, the flashing lights, they were all symbols of a world built on vanity and pride. But when the fire came, it exposed the truth. It burned away the illusions, leaving only the ashes behind. And in the ashes, there was an opportunity to start anew. The people who had knelt in prayer had found that opportunity. They had found a way to let go of the idols that had held them captive for so long. And in doing so, they had opened the door for restoration. They had chosen to live in a way that honored God, that placed others before themselves, that embraced love and humility over selfishness and greed. And because of that, they had become part of the transformation that was happening in the city. The fire was still burning in other parts of the city, but now it felt different. It didn't feel like destruction anymore. It felt like purification. It was as though the fire was burning away the final remnants of what needed to go, clearing the way for something new to emerge, something better, something real. The vision shifted again, and this time I found myself standing at the edge of the city, looking out over the land. The sky was clear, the smoke had dissipated, and the sun was beginning to rise over the horizon. The city below me was no longer a place of chaos and destruction. It was a place of hope. A place where people were rebuilding, not just their homes, but their hearts. They were rebuilding not on the foundation of wealth or fame, but on the foundation of love, humility, and faith. And as I looked down at the city, I saw something else. I saw families coming together, not because they had to, but because they wanted to. I saw communities working side by side, not to compete or outdo one another, but to help each other. I saw people putting down their idols, their possessions, their pride, and picking up something far more valuable, their relationship with God and with each other. It was a beautiful sight, and in that moment, I understood. The fire had not been the end. It had been the beginning of something new, the beginning of a restoration that could spread far beyond the city limits. The beginning of a revival that could sweep through the world if only we were willing to let go of the things that had been holding us back. I turned to Jesus, and this time he spoke. "This is the way forward," he said, his voice steady and firm. "This is the path of life. The idols will fall, the wealth will fade, and the fame will die. But the love, the humility, and the faith, these will remain. And it is these things that will rebuild the world. It is these things that will heal the brokenness. It is these things that will bring life where there was once death." And in that moment, I knew that the fire had done its work. It had exposed the truth. It had shown us the way, and it had given us the opportunity to choose something better. The question was no longer about whether we would rebuild. The question was, how would we rebuild? Would we rebuild on the same old foundations, on the pursuit of wealth, power, and fame? Or would we rebuild on something stronger, something lasting, on love, humility, and faith? The choice was ours. And as I stood there with the sun rising over the city, I made my choice. I would rebuild, not on the ashes of idols, but on the solid ground of faith and love. And I would pray that others would choose the same. The fire had not been the end. It had been the beginning.